Hello student, good morning. I hope you all will be safe and sound as we have just completed the chapter of geography. Now we are going to start the next chapter of history, that is about women, caste and reforms. In this one chapter mainly we will come to know in ancient time what was the condition of the women, as well as about the caste system, which sort of the caste system was followed over there, and as well as which sort of the initiatives had been taken by different reformers to improve the society, to reform the caste system as well as the condition of women. Okay, what they have given, see in this one, have you ever thought of how children lived about 200 years ago? Have you ever have you ever observed how the children they were living 200 years back? Nowadays, most girls from middle class families go to school. If we take the example of present time, most of the girls, almost every girl is going to the school from every class, whether that is lower class, middle class and upper class. Okay, and often study with boys, and even we know, and yourself you are studying with the boys. On growing up, many of them go to colleges and universities and take up jobs for that. And as well as we all know that after completing their schooling, mainly the girls, they often as well go to the colleges and universities, and after doing the good, after getting the good education, even after that they are getting good jobs in the different sectors. They have to be adults before they are legally married, and according to law they can marry anyone they like from any caste and communities, and widow can remarry too. Here after this one they have given, so they have to be adults, means after becoming adults, after in the young age, so they can legally married. The girls, they can legally married according to the law, whatever the law is there. Like if we take the example of present time, for girls the marry minimum age must be 18, and for boys that is minimum age of 21. They can marry anyone they like. Even the girls, they can choose their life partner according to their wish, from any caste, from any community, and even the widows, whoever the widows in our society, they can remarry also. All women, like all men, can vote and stand for elections, as you all know that in our country. So all women, all the female, like all the men, they can even vote and they can stand for the election as well. Of course, these rights are not actually enjoyed by all. Of course, as you all know that whatever the rights this has been provided, these are actually not just utilized and enjoyed by all. Poor people have little or no access to education, and in many families women cannot choose their husband. Even if you see in some of the interior areas at present, so if mainly the poor people, they have little or no access to education. The poor families girls, they are not going to the school. And even in many families, the women, the girls mainly, they cannot choose their husband. They had to do where their parents are saying to them. 200 years ago, things were very different. If you compare the present scenario, the present time, with the ancient time, so the time was totally different. The time, it was very different. Most children were married off at an early age. Most of the children at that time, 200 years back, if you take the example, so they were getting the marry at very little age, at a very small age, at an early age. Both Hindu and Muslim men could marry more than one wife. And at that time, for Hindus and Muslims, and ancient time, they could marry more than one wife. They can get the marry with more than one girl. Okay? If some parts of the country, widows were praised if they chose death by burning themselves on the funeral pyre of their husband. And at that time as well, before 200 years back, if we take the example, so these widows were admired, these widows were praised, these were admired and appreciated by the society if they were also choosing death by burning themselves in the funeral fire of their husband while their husbands were burning. So if they were burning alive in this particular funeral fire, so they were appreciated. Women who died in this manner, whether willingly or otherwise, were called sati, meaning virtuous women. And at that time, what used to happen, women who used to do these all the things, who used to burn in their this one in funeral pyre of their husband. So these women were, whether they were burning themselves willingly or otherwise, they were called sati, meaning virtuous women. Women's right to property were also restricted. So at that time, whoever the right to property the women were getting, it was also restricted. They were not having this right, meant to say. Besides, most women had virtually no access to education. And even they do not have any access to the education. In many parts of the country, people believed that if a woman were educated, she would become a widow. So, in many parts, at that time, in the different parts of the country, what used to happen, the people, they believed that if a woman was educated, if the woman got education, so she would become a widow. Then, different between men and women were not only once in the society. In most regions, people were divided along lines of the caste. Brahman and Kshatri considered themselves as upper caste, and others as traders, moneylenders, often referred to the Vaisyas, were placed after them. So different between the men and women were not only in the society at that time. Means there is a huge difference, as we have talked, huge difference between men and women in the society. And along with this one, in most of the region of the country, the people were also divided in the lines of caste system. The Brahmins and the Kshatriya, they were considered themselves as the upper caste, and others as like traders and the moneylenders, they were referred as the Vaisyas. And that is that then came peasants and artisans such as weavers and potters, referred to as Sudras. As four Varnas were there, the whole society was divided. That is Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya and Shudra. Okay, they have categorized themselves. And then after this one, at the lowest rung were those who labored to keep cities and villages clean or work at jobs that upper caste considered polluting. That is, it could be lead the loss of caste status. And there were also the one below the Sudras. They have called over the lowest rung, the lowest part, the lowest status of the society. Those labored who keep city and villages clean, who used to sweep the things, who used to clean the cities and villages. They all worked at jobs that upper caste considered polluting. Whatever the upper caste were polluting, so these all the things were cleaned by them. And it could lead the loss of the caste status. The upper castes also treated many of these groups at the bottom untouchables. And upper caste people, to them, they were just they were treated as at the bottom. These were called untouchables. They were not allowed to enter temples, draw water from the wells used by the upper caste, or bath in the ponds where upper caste bathed. So these untouchables were not allowed to enter in the temples, to drop up to fetch the water from where the upper caste people were taking, and they could not bath in these ponds where the upper caste people were bathing. They were seen as inferior human beings. These people, these untouchables, were considered as very inferior, very backward human beings. Over the 19th and 20th century, many of these norms and perceptions slowly changed. Mean to say, in the beginning of the 19th and in the 20th century, many of these, whatever the perception, whatever the views, whatever these norms were there, these were going to be changed. Let us see how this happened, how these things were changed in the society. These all the things have been given. At first they have given here about working towards change. From the early 19th century, we find debates and discussion about social customs and practices taking on a new character. So by the beginning of the 19th century, what happened? The discussion was taken place. The debates that took place in the social customs and practices taking on a new character. I mean to say, whatever the customs were followed at the time by the Indian societies, so these all the things were discussed and debated. One important reason for this was the development of new forms of communication. So, one important reason for this development, why these things were taken place, so new forms of communication that took place. How? That has been given. For the first time, books, newspaper, magazine, that is leaflets and pamphlets were printed. So, during that time, so many of the things were printed, like newspapers, magazines, books, pamphlets, these all the things were printed. These were far cheaper and far more accessible than the manuscript that you have read about in class 7th. So, as the printing press was invented at that time, so these newspaper, books, magazines, pamphlets, these all the things were printed. So these were accessible. Everyone can access these all the things because these were quite cheap compared to the other things, like compared to the manuscripts. Earlier in class 7th, we have read about the manuscripts which were handwritten. So now the printing is there. So these things were printed. Therefore, ordinary people could read these, and many of them could also write and express their ideas in their own languages. So therefore they have given here, so the common men, ordinary people, meant to say the common people, they could read these all the things, and even they can also write and express their ideas in their own languages. Many kinds of issues like social, political, economic and religious could now be debated and discussed by men and sometimes by women as well in the new cities. And whatever the cities and towns were there, so the many of the issues like social issues, political issues and economic issues and even the religious issues, these were discussed and debated by men and by sometimes women as well in these cities. The discussions could reach out to the wider public and could become linked to movement for the social change. So whatever the discussion that took place, so it was just reach out in the wider public. Mean to say more of the people. So they came to know about these discussions and could become the link to movement. And that turned into the movements for the social change. Then after, what they have given, see, these debates were often initiated by Indian reformers and reform groups. So these debates and as well as these discussions that were often initiated, that was oftenly just initiated by Indian reformers and reform groups. One such reformer was Rajaram Mohan Roy, 1772-1833. Here, one of the Indian reformer name they have given Rajaram Mohan Roy. What did it see? He founded a reform association known as Brahmo Sabha, later known as Brahmo Samaj, in Calcutta. So he just founded, he just discovered, he just made a reform association, a reform that is organization known as Brahmo Sabha. Later on, it came to be known as Brahmo Samaj. In Calcutta, he found this one thing. People such as Rajaram Mohan Roy are described as reformer because they felt that changes were necessary in society and unjust practices needed to be done away with. So like these sort of the reformers, like they have given here the example of Rajaram Mohan Roy. So these were described as a reformer who just felt that changes was necessary in the society. Society, there must be some changes in the society, and also unjust practices needed to be done away with. What about the unjust practice, unfair means of practices in the society? They needed to be away with. Away with mean to say they must be removed. They thought that the best way to ensure such changes was by persuading people to give up old practices and adopt a new way of life. And these sort of the reformers, they just felt and they just thought how they could remove these all the things to ensure, to make sure that changes by persuading people, by just persuading the people, by just knowing their perceptions, to give up the old practices, to tell the people to give up, to leave the old practices and to adopt the new way of life. Okay, then Raja Ram Mohan Roy was keen to spread the knowledge of Western education in the country and bring about greater freedom and equality for women. So left side you can see that is the pic of Raja Ram Mohan Roy. So what he wanted, that he wanted to spread the knowledge of Western education. He wanted to spread, he just supported the Western education in our country, and he also told that to bring about greater freedom and equality for women. He also argued that the women must get more freedom and equality. He wrote about the way women were forced to bear the burden of domestic work, confined to the home and the kitchen, and did not allowed to move out and became educated. He also told the condition of the women, how they were forced to do the work of the domestic work, and how they had to be within the four walls of their houses, and they had to be engaged in their kitchen work and not allowed to move out, as well as to become educated. He just described these all the things. Then changing the lives of the widows. What happened here? Raja Ram Mohan Roy was particularly moved by the problems widows faced in their lives. Raja Ram Mohan Roy also, he has done some reforms in the life of the widows. He began a campaign against the practice of sati. He just started one campaign which is against the practice of sati pratha. Raja Ram Mohan Roy was well versed in Sanskrit, Persian and several other Indian and European languages. He was having the knowledge about Sanskrit, about Persian language and as well as other Indian and European language. He tried to show through his writing that the practice of widow burning had no sanction in ancient text. So he just tried to show the societies. He tried to tell to the society that there isn't any practice of sati burning had no sanction in the ancient text. Whatever we were having the ancient text, in these ancient texts, nowhere it has written about the burning of women, burning of widow. By the early 19th century, as you have read in chapter 7, many British officials had also begun to criticize Indian tradition and customs. As you have read about this one thing, many of the British officials, they have also just criticized, they have also opposed the Indian customs and traditions. They were therefore more than willing to listen to Raja Ram Mohan Roy, who were reputed to be a learned man. In 1829, sati was banned. As they were also, the British officials were also, they wanted to listen to the Raja Ram Mohan Roy because he was a reputed man. Reputed meant to say well educated, well versed in the literature. So that is why he was also supported by the British officials. And finally, in 1829, the sati pratha, this was banned and this was totally removed from the country. The strategy adopted by Raja Ram Mohan Roy was used by the later reformers as well. whatever the strategy, whatever the process, whatever the method he adopted, so it was also used later on by other reformers as well. Whenever they wished to challenge a practice that seemed harmful, they tried to find a verse or sentence in the ancient sacred text that supports their point of view. And whatever the later, whoever the reformers were there, they were also, what they did, they were also challenged these things which they felt it is harmful in the society. So they tried to find these all the sentence and the words in the ancient sacred text, and they supposed to their point of view. Then they suggested that the practice as it existed at present was against early tradition. Then these reformers, whatever the practice that is harmful practice, which is not in the favor of all the people of the society, so they used to find out it, and they used to tell which is against of early tradition. This is okay. Then after what they have given, that is, for instance, they have given something here that we will discuss in the next video. Okay.